The FIA's post-race inspection has uncovered a stunning and completely unexpected detail inside Max Verstappen's Red Bull after his dramatic Qatar victory, raising new questions about how he transformed a race he could not win on pace into his 70th career triumph. Fresh analysis from the governing body shows a behavioral shift in the RB21 that did not match the aerodynamic characteristics Red Bull had presented earlier in the weekend, creating immediate interest in how the car stabilized when the championship fight was reaching maximum tension. This revelation arrives at the most critical moment of the season, because Verstappen now trails Lando Norris by only 12 points with a single race left to decide the World Championship. Before I reveal the exact detail the FIA identified and how it could reshape the Abu Dhabi finale, make sure you subscribe because the final chapter of this title fight is about to become even more explosive. Max Verstappen entered the Qatar Grand Prix knowing he did not have the fastest car. The RB21 had been slower than the McLarens in every competitive session, suffering from understeer on entry and a lack of rotation in tight corners. Red Bull accepted early that they could not beat McLaren on raw pace and needed to keep Verstappen within strategic range. Even in the first stint, Verstappen confirmed through radio that the car slid into turn 1 and struggled for front bite in the slow zones, reinforcing the gap between expectation and reality. Then came the moment that changed the World Championship. On lap 7, the collision between Hülkenberg and Gasly triggered a safety car. At that instant, Oscar Piastri led, Lando Norris followed comfortably in second, and Verstappen sat third with no realistic path to attack. Hannah Schmitz responded instantly, calling Verstappen to the pits and instructing him to do the opposite to Norris. Verstappen's reaction said everything. He shouted that McLaren were crazy when he saw both Piastri and Norris stay out. That single decision reshaped the entire championship. Once the race restarted, Verstappen did not need superior pace. He only needed the McLarens to complete the mandatory pit stop that he had already taken. When they did, the lead fell into his hands naturally. Piastri closed dramatically in the final stint, but the strategic structure Red Bull created ensured Verstappen always had enough tire life to defend. The victory came from execution and instinct rather than dominance, something even Verstappen acknowledged when he laughed on the radio celebrating that he was still alive in the title fight. This is where the FIA's interest begins. During the early laps of the race, the RB21 behaved exactly as expected, with the same understeer and limited rotation that had defined the weekend. But after the safety car stop, the car showed a smoother aerodynamic balance, particularly across the front axle. This stability did not suggest illegality, yet it did surprise the FIA because it did not fully match the conditions Red Bull had reported earlier. The governing body is analyzing why the balance improved more abruptly than expected under race fuel, tire freshness, and setup changes. Verstappen's radio messages provide additional context. He told his engineer that the car was still sliding slightly into turn 1 but was manageable. Lambiase then warned him that Piastri was flying with laps in the 1:24 range and reminded him to protect the left rear. These exchanges showed a driver operating with absolute discipline, extracting everything from a car that still carried limitations. Verstappen had to balance aggression and restraint perfectly to maintain the gap. The championship implications are enormous. With one race to go, Norris leads with 408 points, Verstappen follows with 396, and Piastri sits at 392. If Verstappen wins the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, Norris must finish fourth or worse or he loses the championship. If they end tied on points, Verstappen wins the World Championship by virtue of having more victories. Qatar turned the finale into a direct psychological duel, and Verstappen enters Abu Dhabi with momentum on his side. To prepare for the final battle, Red Bull will not introduce significant upgrades. The RB21 will remain essentially unchanged, with only small wing adjustments for Yas Marina. Their approach relies on perfect execution, calm decision-making, and Verstappen's unique ability to deliver under championship pressure. McLaren may still have the fastest car, but Red Bull has something more dangerous. They have a driver who refuses to lose a title if there is even the smallest opening. Qatar did not showcase raw speed. It showcased championship resilience. Red Bull entered the Qatar Grand Prix with a clear understanding that the RB21 did not possess the raw performance needed to match McLaren. From the first laps of the race, Verstappen confirmed that the front end lacked the bite required to carry speed through the Losail circuit's early corners. He reported sliding into turn 1 and repeatedly referenced the persistent understeer that had already limited him during qualifying. This created an immediate structural disadvantage because Qatar rewards strong front axle rotation more than most circuits. Verstappen could follow the McLarens, but initiating an overtake required a level of stability that the RB21 could not naturally provide. Tire behavior deepened the difficulty. The medium compound began to overheat earlier than expected, and the left side in particular showed signs of rising temperature after only a handful of laps. Verstappen felt the consequence immediately. The front tires resisted the sharp inputs he required, while the rear tires demanded constant modulation to maintain traction on exit. This forced him to reduce steering angle into several corners and widen his entry lines to preserve the tire surface. These adaptations stabilized the car but also reduced his ability to generate the pace necessary to challenge the McLarens. The track layout further exposed Red Bull's weakness. Losail is dominated by fast directional changes and long corners that punish cars with limited front-end precision. Verstappen needed to commit aggressively to the middle sector to stay within striking distance, but the RB21 resisted. Every time he attempted to push, the front pushed back, obliging him to choose between maintaining pace or preserving the tires. This imbalance placed Verstappen in a reactive position where he had to manage and respond rather than attack. A driver who typically dictates the rhythm of a race instead found himself bound by limitations within the car's mechanical and aerodynamic balance. Environmental conditions added an extra layer of complexity. Qatar's fluctuating winds altered corner entry consistency, and Verstappen described moments where the car's balance shifted unpredictably. These variations amplified the RB21's weaknesses. A slight change in wind direction could remove front grip or overload the rear mid-corner. McLaren handled these fluctuations with greater stability, allowing their drivers to maintain rhythm while Verstappen had to constantly reinterpret the car's behavior. These conditions made every lap a recalibration rather than a natural extension of pace. The radio between Verstappen and Gianpiero Lambiase reflected how tense the situation became. Verstappen explained that the car was still sliding on entry, though he could manage it. Lambiase focused his language on tire protection and left rear preservation rather than pace extraction. These exchanges revealed a team prioritizing survival over aggression. They understood that if Verstappen attempted to match the McLarens directly, the tires would not last and the gap would widen dramatically. The dynamic between driver and engineer became a balancing act of discipline rather than ambition. Strategically, the situation was even more dangerous. With the mediums degrading early and the car unable to follow closely without additional tire loss, Red Bull faced the risk of being undercut and overcut simultaneously. They lacked the pace to trigger defensive strategy and lacked the balance to pursue offensive strategy. Red Bull entered a strategic stalemate where they relied entirely on external race conditions to alter the order. Without the intervention of the safety car, Verstappen would have remained behind both McLarens with no credible path to victory. The race was slipping away not through error but through the natural consequences of the RB21's limitations. All of this created a psychological challenge for Verstappen. He is a driver whose competitive strength comes from controlling races. Qatar forced him into a passive posture where he had to wait rather than dictate. He had to abandon his instinct for sharp racecraft and instead respect the limitations the car imposed. This tension between his natural aggression and the car's demands framed the first phase of the race as a controlled survival effort. Only when the safety car intervention opened a new strategic window did Verstappen's opportunity emerge. Until that moment, the problem was simple but suffocating. He had no tools to attack and no margin to defend. The Red Bull engineering group began the Qatar Grand Prix with a car that was already several steps out of its comfort zone. The RB21's aerodynamic map had struggled to align with simulation across the entire weekend, especially in the front-end load distribution that Losail demands. Once Verstappen confirmed through radio that the front tire struggled to bite into turn 1, the engineers shifted instantly from chasing lap time to building a survival framework. Their priority became constructing a balance plan that kept Verstappen competitive enough to remain in McLaren's orbit without triggering the rapid thermal buildup that had emerged during practice and qualifying. With tire temperatures rising earlier than expected, Red Bull engineers concentrated on stabilizing the entire platform rather than attempting to extract aggressive performance. They adjusted differential settings to protect the rear and recalibrated throttle profiles to soften exit demands. This work reduced stress on the left rear, which was the tire most vulnerable to overheating. Every change was made with a single goal in mind: keep Verstappen within strategic striking distance until an external trigger changed the race. Without this careful engineering restraint, Verstappen would have lost position rapidly as the stint progressed. Energy management became another crucial component. The RB21 lacked the clean corner exits needed to charge the battery efficiently, meaning Verstappen could not rely on typical deployment patterns. Engineers recalculated harvesting points in real time to provide him with a stable energy profile for both defense and controlled bursts of pace. They ensured that Verstappen never emptied the battery in pursuit of McLaren, which would have left him exposed on the following laps. This careful modeling allowed Verstappen to remain calm even when the McLarens began stretching their pace. Environmental conditions created further challenges for the engineering team. Wind shifts across the main straight and middle sector affected front-end consistency, and Verstappen reported the balance changing unpredictably mid-corner. The engineers responded by providing targeted guidance for specific turns, telling Verstappen where to ease the brake release or where the wind would reduce front grip. In moments where the car became more sensitive, the engineering group essentially functioned as an additional sensory system, giving Verstappen information he could not gather from the cockpit alone. The decisive moment for the engineering team came with the Lap 7 safety car triggered by the collision between Hülkenberg and Gasly. Red Bull's analysts assessed the situation within seconds and realized that the only route to victory required breaking the McLaren rhythm. The call for Verstappen to pit and to do the opposite of Norris was the culmination of this analysis. They understood that McLaren's refusal to box would create a strategic imbalance that Verstappen could exploit across the remaining stints. When McLaren kept both cars on track, Red Bull's engineering group understood instantly that the race had shifted onto their terms. After the pit stop, something unexpected appeared in the data. The RB21's balance stabilized more quickly than predicted, particularly in the high-speed transitions where it had previously resisted rotation. The FIA later noted this shift as part of their interest in the post-race inspection. Red Bull engineers attributed the improved balance to a combination of fresh tires, reduced fuel load, and a more favorable aerodynamic window created by minor temperature changes. With the car suddenly operating closer to its ideal range, the engineers focused on ensuring Verstappen resisted the urge to overpower the tires, preserving the advantage the strategy had created.